It's your girl Bianca, and welcome back to yet another episode of Are You Alone? But what I'm actually asking you is, are you achieving life on natural euphoria? Yes, it is true. Your girl is finally back. I took a little bit of a leave of absence for quite a bit. For about like 2 weeks or so. I just had a lot of like personal things that I had to take care of, so kind of just hit like a reset button as far as just like myself and life and just things that I was going through. But other than that, I hope you guys have been doing well. You guys have been staying safe, staying healthy. You know, y'all are doing good, whether it is physically, emotionally, mentally, just all that good. I hope everyone's just been taking care of themselves. Anyways, I'm just going to dive into today's episode. If you missed out on the latest episode of Are You Alone, I had talked about the times that I experienced racial discrimination in my life as an Asian American. And I talk about how it kind of affected me growing up, but how I also eventually learned to really embrace certain aspects about myself as I got older. So if you have yet to, go give it a listen. Are You Alone is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, and many more. However, this week's episode does go out to my ex, Jesse Pavolando, who happens to also still be a good friend and had helped me with some inspiration for this week's episode. But really what had happened was on Sunday, I've decided that I'm going to start posting a suggestion box on my Instagram story. So go follow me at BiancaK_16. But I decided I'm going to do that just because for me personally, I think I can turn anything literally into a conversation, so I was like, that'd be fun. Plus, I also really enjoy hearing what is like on your guys' minds, your thoughts, your ideas, just whatever it may be. I find it interesting. So yeah, like I had said, this past Sunday, I posted a suggestion box on my story, and out of the few people who responded, I just felt very pulled towards Jesse's comment. And there was like a lot of other people too who brought up very interesting thoughts and ideas, and I think it was very helpful just because those are some things that I can definitely work off of later on in the future. So it was cool just having conversations with people, kind of picking their brains. But yeah, I decided to focus on the one that Jesse had sent in. So once again, if you're listening or you're watching, big shout out to you because I was really in a creative slump for a little bit. But with that being said, for today's episode, I will be talking about the idea of comparing discipline and motivation. So just to give you guys a little bit more context on this idea, I'm just going to read off of what Jesse had said and like sent in to me. So he said discipline, tips on it, and also comparing it to motivation. So I thought it was really interesting, and I had actually asked him to elaborate more on the part in regards to comparing motivation and discipline. So for those of you who happen to be watching, I'm going to try and put like a picture, kind of just like a diagram, I guess, that Jesse had sent me to help me better understand the idea. And for those of you who are listening, I will try my absolute best to explain it to the extent that my knowledge allows me to do so. But from my understanding and kind of how Jesse had explained this concept to me was that you can't have motivation derive solely off of motivation in itself. And the reason that is said is because it ultimately comes down to your discipline with whatever it is that is quote unquote causing you to be motivated. So just to explain that a little bit more, the idea around this is that motivation is a temporary feeling, and that temporary feeling allows us to start moving into this path that we're kind of working for or that we're just aiming for. So with that being said though, with motivation kind of being that temporary feeling, when we begin to lose the feeling of motivation, we tend to backtrack, or we also can tend to veer off onto kind of like a side road or a different path that doesn't allow us to keep moving forward and to progress. However, when you do add discipline to the equation, we are more driven irregardless of our feelings. So driven to the point where it starts to kind of become part of our routine and our daily activity and things that we just do that turn into habits. So in a sense, the way that I take it, at least, and the way that I kind of look at it is discipline is the act of motivation. And I think it's something that our generation kind of struggles with. It's one of those, I'm just gonna do it tomorrow, I'm just gonna do it another day. And then tomorrow or the other day turns into like 2 months of like not doing it. And obviously everyone, I feel like sometimes people just need a reminder, but like newsflash, tomorrow is never promised. It's not guaranteed. So it's really about what is it that you can do today? What is it that you can do now to try and make a difference and change for the betterment of yourself? What is it that you can do in this moment to do that? Now, it doesn't have to be this huge, great big adjustment of change that needs to happen, but it could literally be as simple as writing out a routine for yourself that you will try to follow each and every day. And then that's where the discipline eventually comes into play, is how are you able to act on the routine that you had set for yourself. Now, when thinking of an example for this, I think this is one of the easiest ones that kind of just comes to mind, and I think some that many people can really relate to, but it is the motivation to work out compared to the discipline to work out. Now, I think, many of us have either told ourselves, I need to go work out, and then we obviously just eventually just don't go and work out. Or there are times too where a lot of us have started the new year in the gym, and then a few weeks kind of passes by and we're kind of back into our old habits, our old routines that don't involve going to the gym. And so I actually had a similar episode to this idea called Mind Games, and essentially it is the same kind of idea. However, what I had talked about was more about like the mental discipline and how that affects our behaviors. So like I had said, it's similar, very similar, but it really just depends on the context and kind of the circumstance that an individual is in. So this is more about like the physical, like actual doing, the actual like put forth effort compared to the mental behavior and changes in that sense. So a prime example of this, and one I kind of just want to like shout out because I'm really proud of her progress, but my mom has recently taken the initiative to incorporate working out into her daily routine. So she'll go down to our fitness center here in the apartment, and she'll go and work out for about an hour or so during her lunch break, and then she'll go back to work. So recently Tuesdays have become kind of my my writing days, just because I've decided that I'm going to start to release new episodes every other Friday. So with that, I came home from my morning lift at my auntie's, and I came home a little bit later than usual, and I remember texting my mom. I was like, hey, I can't work out with you today because I have to write an episode. And this is where like the proud and like the really like just excited moment for her was, because she hit me back and texted me and goes, okay, I will. And so for me, I'm like, that's the discipline that it takes right there. She's not relying on me. She's not relying on solely just motivation in itself. She's relying on the fact that an hour a day has become part of her daily routine, and she's doing her best to stay disciplined with that, to follow, and at the end of the day, become better for herself. The thing about it too is not only is her routine changing, but her eating habits are starting to change, as well as a little bit of like her mental, like just like her mindset is changing. And before, you have some of you people out there who are gonna be like, oh well, how long is that gonna last? One, at least she's out here putting in the work, and two, I'm just protective in general. So don't try and come for her if you don't want to have to deal with me. And I know there's a lot of people who are like, whoa, that didn't even like cross my mind. But unfortunately in this world, there's still a few doubters and haters, and it's really, you just gotta put them in their place. But the thing about that, and on the flip side of all of this, is if you don't want to be a hater anymore and you want to try and become this positive person, you definitely can do so with a little bit of reflection, and just say it with me, a little bit of discipline. There are many factors that come into play. However, I think like the first step is kind of internal exploration, figuring out what it is that you want out of this life, who you want to be, and why you're deciding to not be a hater anymore. And I applaud you for that. If that's a goal or a motivation factor for you, stay disciplined with it. Don't be mean. But another basic example that I think I could set with this, and many of you may have been familiar with it or put forth this example to something else, but let's just say for an example, you're not trying to be a hater anymore, you're working on your mindset, but let's just say for the example, you are driving on the freeway and this one car that you just noticed from like your rear view mirror is coming up pretty hot and is like switching lanes pretty quick, and they're speeding by you. They cut you off without no blinker, and then you get all like angry and mad and road rage because you're like, what are you doing? And blah, blah, blah. But before you go off and like try and get revenge or try and like speed up and like cut them off too, or give them the good old middle finger, think about some things real quick, especially before you put your life in danger by trying to catch up with their ass. But think about things in a larger picture, such as maybe why that person is speeding on the freeway. They might have been speeding because there was a family emergency and that's what they're trying to get to. They're trying to get to the hospital, or they might have been late for work. And then, if some of you are like, well, why didn't they just like leave earlier so they're not late? And it's like, well, what if that person originally does leave earlier? However, on this day, their babysitter canceled and they had to find someone to watch their kid, and that's what made them late. And then maybe some of you are like, well, why didn't they just like take time off if they really needed someone to watch their child, their kid who can't obviously be left alone? Well, what if they couldn't take time off because they didn't have any? Or what if they just needed to work so they can pay the bills, the rent, food for their kid? And, obviously I'm not trying to make excuses for this hypothetical person who had just cut you off, more than it is me making you realize that you don't have all the pieces to the puzzle. And that right there is the mindset you have to discipline yourself to have, which is you don't necessarily know what a person may be going through or what they're struggling through in their lives. So before you make any assumptions based off of what you know and what you see, think about the things that you don't know or you don't see. It honestly is a mindset that does take some time to, I would say, evolve into, but that's where the discipline comes into play, is how often can you tell yourself that, or how often can you remind yourself to think that way when it comes to things that I guess you don't necessarily have much control in. So if you can, just try and discipline your mind in that way. Control how you feel, or control how you go about it. But lastly, the other thing Jesse had asked me for was just tips on being disciplined. And, if we're being honest, I get that my social media might portray that I'm disciplined or that I have like things in order or I know what I'm doing. But like in all reality, I really don't know what I'm doing. I have like somewhat of a routine. I would say I'm somewhat disciplined, but social media only really portrays about 25% of my life and what actually is going on in it. But for me personally, I don't do well with discipline. I know that's kind of just like bad to say considering this is the whole episode, but I just have a harder time staying disciplined and kind of staying in a routine. I obviously think having a routine, staying disciplined is good to have and it is important. However, knowing myself, I also know that part of my routine needs to have a little bit of like adventure and like freedom and a little bit of like spontaneity, because if my routine doesn't consist or like have a little bit of that, I get bored. And then if I'm just going through a routine that causes me to be bored all the time, I tend to kind of just like do some random reckless thing to balance out the boredness. So, that's me with discipline. But as far as what I do know about myself when it comes to my routine and staying disciplined, one of the tips I would say would be to continue to learn more about yourself each day. And with that, I mean, learn how you react to certain things. Learn about the environment that you're in and what environment you thrive the most in. Learn how your body reacts to certain foods, to certain products, to certain workouts. Because we have to realize and kind of recognize that obviously everyone is just, some of us have similar build, some of us don't, but everyone has a different routine that works for them and works for them only. And it's hard to, I guess, kind of copy someone else's routine when it doesn't really fit who you are as just like a person, and that could be whether it is like physically, mentally, and emotionally. So that's why I just say continue to learn more about yourself and what it is that helps you strive and grow the most. And then my second tip to, I guess, stay disciplined is to work on having the mindset of the glass is half full rather than the glass is half empty. And so the way that you can think of it is in a sense of, I only have X amount left to do rather than I have X amount more to do. And so the reason I say that is because obviously more can be good, more money, more food, more clothes if you really need it. So there's that idea of having more is like plentiful. However, when it comes to like something that you're working towards or something that you're striving towards, the idea of more makes it feel or sometimes seem like the distance between you and where you want to be is so far that, it really feels like it's going to take a long time to get there. And so with this, you can think of it as an example of running. Oh my God, I hate those cars. Oh my goodness. Like, not the cars in general, just the noises that they make, especially when I'm recording. But sorry, sidetracked. Anyways, the example that I would set when it comes to this mindset of I have X amount left and I have X amount more is think about it in a way that like you're running and you're like, okay, I have a mile and a half more to run. It kind of seems like dreadful because you have that much more to get to where you are, as compared to I only have a mile and a half left until I'm finished. I've just found that having that mindset kind of just helps a little bit more, especially when you're trying to like finish things, because it kind of makes you focus on the fact that you've come so far and you only have a little bit left to go, rather than looking at it in a way of I have so much more to go. But my last tip would be to really try your best to be present in the current moment that you're in. Try not to think about things that had happened the day before. Try not to think about things that might be happening later on in the day or the day after. Really just be present in your thoughts and in the act that you are doing. Now, I know it doesn't work for everyone, but for me personally, I have just found that you kind of gain this sense of gratitude in the space that you're in, because there was probably one point in time where your mind had told yourself like you'd probably never make it there, or you'd never be in the space and the position that you're in. And so recognizing that you have finally made it into the space you thought was impossible, just try to really embrace and be in that moment, and don't let thinking about the future or thinking about the past really take away that moment from you. Embrace the fact of how far you have come. But the idea of discipline being the act of motivation can simply be compared to one of the most common sayings that I think a lot of us really know, which is actions speak louder than words. And that's just because any act of any sort of doing takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of consistency. It takes a lot of sincerity. And there's even times where you can even be uncomfortable in the act or in the situation that you're presently or currently in. And we have to realize that saying you are motivated is very much different than the act of being motivated. I know I sound like one of those, I don't know, like fitness motivators or trainers, and where they're like, don't tell me, show me. But that's really like what it is. Like show me what it is that you're doing day in and day out, routinely, repetitively, to get to a place that you've been working your ass off to get to, that you've been striving for. And like I was saying, it doesn't have to be this like extravagant or super out of the left field type of move. It could literally be as simple as waking up 30 minutes earlier to do morning yoga, which is what I've started to incorporate into my own personal routine. But besides the fact of that, like I said, just the smaller and the finer details come into play as well. Like I was saying, you don't have to make these big leaps, but recognize that these small details, they add up and they amount to progress over time, to a point where when you get the opportunity to pan out to the bigger picture of things, you really only have X amount of steps left until you reach the point you thought you would never get to, or you reach your goals that you've set, or these milestones, and you get to really embrace the progress over that time. So as I end this episode with the comparison of discipline and motivation, and the idea of discipline being the act of motivation, I just want to leave you guys with a quote from Waldo Emerson, which is, "What you do speaks so loudly that I cannot hear what you say." My intention for today's episode was to bring to light the minds of other people around us, to think about how their thoughts, their ideas, their suggestions, and all of that can actually reach out and really help other people. Though the idea and the debate of discipline versus motivation may be one that you may have never heard of, or maybe you actually have. Either way, everything that I have mentioned is once again something for you all just to consider and think about when it comes to your life. Hopefully many of you found this helpful and are even thinking about implementing certain parts of this into your daily routine or day-to-day life. However, if you do disagree, I really do encourage you to share your opinions and your thoughts, just because I would like to hear, what you kind of have to think from your point of view. However, with that being said, please make sure to embrace one's individuality while exercising empathy when sharing your thoughts and your opinions. But once again, I do want to give a shout out to Jessie for this week's episode. And if any of you have any ideas, thoughts, or suggestions, make sure to be on the lookout for the suggestion box that I will be trying to post every Sunday, or maybe every other Sunday. However, this concludes yet another episode of Are You Alone? Thank you so much for watching and for listening. Be sure to go stream all of the latest episodes of Are You Alone on whatever streaming service you use. And if you are currently watching, please make sure to go give this episode a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe and turn those post notifications on. I am changing my release dates for new episodes. I will be posting every other Friday, and that's just because posting weekly was kind of becoming hectic and overwhelming with my schedule. And I've kind of also found it that you guys respond better on Fridays. I think maybe it's just because we're closer to the weekend and everyone's a little bit more happier and like gleeful or joyful as compared to me releasing on Wednesdays, where maybe some of you felt like this little Asian girl is just like nagging you in the middle of the week. Hopefully that wasn't the case, but that's okay. It's all good. It's all good. I don't take it to heart. But you can keep up with Are You Alone on Instagram at AYA_podcast and on Facebook at the Are You Alone follow page. Other than that, my name is Bianca, and as we continue this journey, all I ask is that you do your best to achieve life on natural euphoria. Bye!